He was just trying to buy groceries with his food stamps when the store clerk decided to humiliate him in front of everyone. What started as a routine shopping trip quickly turned into the clerk's worst nightmare, because the 76-year-old veteran he was mocking wasn't just any old man, he was someone whose name still carried weight at the highest levels of the Pentagon. And exactly 45 minutes later, when federal officials called the store demanding answers, the clerk's face went pale as he realized he had just disrespected a decorated war hero. Miller's Market sat on the corner of Main Street and 2nd Avenue in Millbrook, Tennessee, a small town where everyone knew everyone and strangers were noticed immediately. The grocery store had been family-owned for 3 generations, serving a community of farmers, retirees, and working families who appreciated personal service and competitive prices. On Tuesday mornings, the store was typically quiet, with only a handful of customers picking up essentials before the afternoon rush. Colonel James Iron Mitchell pushed his small shopping cart slowly down the cereal aisle, his weathered hands gripping the handle more tightly than necessary. At 76, James moved with the careful deliberation of a man whose body had endured decades of military service, 3 combat deployments, and the kind of injuries that never fully healed. His silver hair was still cut in a precise military style, and his posture remained straight despite the arthritis that made every step a small battle. James wore a simple flannel shirt and worn jeans, nothing that would indicate he had once commanded a regiment, led men through some of the most dangerous combat zones in the world, or earned decorations that most soldiers could only dream of receiving. He preferred it that way. After retiring 15 years ago, James had deliberately chosen anonymity over recognition, quiet dignity over public acclaim. The shopping cart contained the basics: bread, milk, canned soup, and generic brands that stretched his limited budget as far as possible. James's military pension provided enough for rent and utilities, but groceries required careful planning and the supplemental assistance he had qualified for after his wife Martha passed away 2 years earlier. The food stamps weren't something he was proud of, but pride didn't fill an empty stomach, and at his age, James had learned to be practical about survival. As he approached the checkout counter, James noticed that only one register was open, operated by a young man who appeared to be in his early 20s. The clerk's name tag read Tyler, and his bored expression suggested he found his job tedious and his customers beneath his interest. Tyler was scrolling through his phone when James approached with his modest selection of groceries. Tyler looked up from his device with obvious annoyance at being interrupted. "Find everything you need?" he asked in a tone that suggested he didn't actually care about the answer. "Yes, thank you," James replied politely, beginning to unload his items onto the conveyor belt. Tyler scanned the items with mechanical efficiency, his attention clearly elsewhere. When he finished, he announced the total. James reached into his wallet and withdrew his electronic benefits transfer card, the modern version of food stamps that provided nutrition assistance to qualifying low-income individuals. He had hoped to complete the transaction quietly and without drawing attention, but Tyler's reaction made that impossible. "Seriously," Tyler said loudly enough for everyone in the store to hear. James felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with embarrassment, but he maintained his composure. "Yes," he said simply. Tyler made an exaggerated show of examining the EBT card as if it might be fraudulent. "You know, some of us actually work for our money," he said, his voice carrying across the store. "Must be nice to live off the government." James remained silent, hoping the transaction would be completed quickly so he could leave with what remained of his dignity intact. But Tyler was just getting started. "Let me guess," Tyler continued, processing the payment with deliberate slowness. "Disability check too, right? Probably claiming you can't work because of some made-up injury." "Young man," James said quietly, his voice carrying the authority that had once commanded respect from soldiers half Tyler's age, "I'd appreciate if you could complete the transaction." Tyler laughed, a sound that attracted the attention of other customers and store employees. "Oh, now you want to give orders? Let me tell you something, old man. I work 40 hours a week to pay taxes that fund your free groceries. The least you can do is show some gratitude instead of acting like you're better than me." Mrs. Henderson, a regular customer who was shopping nearby, looked uncomfortable with Tyler's behavior but said nothing. Two other customers in adjacent aisles had stopped their shopping to watch the confrontation unfold. James was aware that he had become a public spectacle, but years of military discipline kept his expression calm and his voice level. "I'm not acting like anything," James replied. "I'm simply trying to buy groceries and go home." "Sure you are," Tyler said, holding up the EBT card. "You know what I think? I think people like you are what's wrong with this country. Taking handouts instead of working, living off the tax dollars of people who actually contribute to society." That's when Tyler made his biggest mistake. He held the EBT card higher, waving it in the air for everyone to see. "Hey everybody, look at this. We've got another one who thinks the government owes him a living." The small crowd of customers now openly stared at James, some looking embarrassed by Tyler's behavior, others seeming to enjoy the spectacle. James felt the weight of their judgment, the assumption that he was just another lazy person gaming the system, someone who had never contributed anything meaningful to society. James took a deep breath, reached into his wallet, and pulled out a small, worn leather case. He opened it slowly and placed it on the counter where Tyler could see it clearly. Inside the case was a Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration awarded by the United States government, given only to those who distinguished themselves through conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Tyler's smug expression faltered as he stared at the medal, not fully understanding what he was looking at, but recognizing that it was something significant. "This," James said quietly, his voice carrying the steel that had once rallied troops under enemy fire, "is what I got for spending 13 months in a prisoner of war camp in Vietnam, for refusing to give up classified information even when they broke both my legs and 3 ribs, for leading an escape that saved 17 other American soldiers." Tyler's face went pale as the implications sank in. "I also received 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, and a Distinguished Service Cross during my 40 years of military service," James continued. "I commanded a regiment during Operation Desert Storm, trained counterterrorism units after 9/11, and spent my final 5 years in the Army developing veteran support programs." The store had gone completely silent. Mrs. Henderson approached the counter with tears in her eyes. The other customers looked ashamed of their previous assumption. "So when you say I've never contributed to society," James said, closing the metal case and returning it to his wallet, "you might want to consider that I spent 4 decades ensuring you have the freedom to work 40 hours a week and complain about your taxes." Tyler stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without sound. He had just publicly humiliated a Medal of Honor recipient, a man whose sacrifices had earned him the highest honor his country could bestow. But the real shock was still coming, because James Mitchell wasn't just any Medal of Honor recipient. His name was still known at the Pentagon, and his phone call was about to bring the full weight of the U.S. military establishment down on Miller's Market. What Tyler didn't know was that Colonel James Mitchell's military record was the stuff of legend. During the Vietnam War, he had been captured during a reconnaissance mission behind enemy lines and spent 13 months in a North Vietnamese prison camp. Despite enduring torture that left him with permanent injuries, he had never revealed classified information and had ultimately led an escape that saved 17 fellow prisoners. But his service hadn't ended there. After Vietnam, James had become one of the Army's most respected leaders, commanding troops in every major conflict for the next 3 decades. During the Gulf War, his tactical brilliance had saved hundreds of American lives. After 9/11, he had personally developed the counterterrorism training protocols that were still being used by special forces worldwide. Even more significant was James's role in veteran affairs. During his final 5 years of service, he had been assigned to the Pentagon's Veteran Support Division, where he had designed programs that had helped thousands of returning soldiers transition to civilian life. His work had been so influential that current veteran assistance programs still bore his fingerprints. The bitter irony was that James Mitchell had literally created some of the food assistance programs he now relied on. His understanding of veteran needs, combined with his Pentagon connections, had resulted in legislation that expanded food aid eligibility for veterans living on fixed incomes. Tyler had just humiliated the very man who had fought to ensure that struggling veterans could afford to eat. James's phone call to General Morrison set in motion a response that Tyler could never have imagined. Morrison's first call went to General Robert Hayes, the current Joint Chiefs Chairman and someone who had served as a young lieutenant under James's command during Desert Storm. "Pat," General Hayes said when Morrison explained the situation, "you're telling me someone publicly humiliated Iron Mitchell, the man who saved my life in Kuwait?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you, sir. And it gets worse. They mocked him for using food benefits that he helped create." General Hayes was silent for a moment, processing the magnitude of the disrespect. "Pat, I want a full report on this incident on my desk within the hour, and I want to know what we're doing to prevent this from happening to other veterans." Morrison's second call went to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, who had worked directly with James on veteran legislation during the Bush administration. Within minutes, the VA was mobilizing resources to investigate whether Tyler's treatment of James represented a broader pattern of veteran discrimination. The third call went to the Tennessee National Guard, whose current commander had learned military strategy in courses that James had taught at the War College. Before the day was over, National Guard leadership was demanding answers about how one of America's most decorated heroes had been treated in their state. By the time Tyler received the Pentagon phone call, the incident at Miller's Market was being discussed at the highest levels of the U.S. military and veteran affairs establishment. What had started as one ignorant clerk's moment of cruelty had become a federal case study in veteran mistreatment. James completed his transaction in silence, took his groceries, and walked out of the store with the same quiet dignity he had maintained throughout the confrontation. But once he reached his car, he pulled out his phone and made a call that would change everything. "General Morris," James said when someone answered. "It's James Mitchell. I need to tell you about something that just happened." The voice on the other end belonged to General Patricia Morrison, current Pentagon liaison to Veteran Affairs and someone who had served under James's command 20 years earlier during Operation Enduring Freedom. Morrison had never forgotten the colonel who had saved her career and taught her what real leadership looked like. "Colonel Mitchell," Morrison replied, her voice immediately alert. "What's wrong?" James recounted the incident at Miller's Market, describing Tyler's behavior and the public humiliation he had endured. He wasn't calling to complain or seek revenge. He was calling because he recognized that Tyler's attitude represented a broader problem with how veterans were perceived and treated in civilian society. "Colonel," Morrison said when James finished his account, "this is unacceptable. No veteran should ever be subjected to that kind of treatment, especially not a Medal of Honor recipient." "Patricia, I'm not calling because I want special treatment," James said. "I'm calling because if this is how they treat an old veteran with food stamps, how are they treating younger veterans who are struggling? How many others are being humiliated for needing assistance?" Morrison understood immediately. This wasn't about one incident. It was about systematic disrespect for veterans that needed to be addressed at the highest levels. "Colonel, give me 45 minutes. What Tyler didn't know was that General Morrison's next call went directly to the Pentagon's Office of Public Affairs, followed by calls to the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Tennessee National Guard, and the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Within 30 minutes, the story of Tyler's treatment of a Medal of Honor recipient was being discussed at the highest levels of the U.S. military. 45 minutes after James left Miller's Market, the store's phone rang. "Miller's Market," Tyler answered, still shaken from his encounter with James. "This is Colonel Sarah Chen from the Pentagon's Office of Public Affairs," the voice on the other end said. "I need to speak with your store manager immediately regarding the treatment of Medal of Honor recipient Colonel James Mitchell." Tyler's legs nearly gave out beneath him. "The Pentagon?" "That's correct. Colonel Mitchell is a decorated war hero who was subjected to public humiliation at your establishment. This matter is now under federal review." Tyler's hands began shaking as he called for his manager, Bob Miller, who was the grandson of the store's founder. Miller came to the phone with no idea that his family's business was about to become the center of a national controversy. "Mr. Miller," Colonel Chen continued, "I'm calling to inform you that one of your employees has created a situation that requires immediate federal attention. Colonel Mitchell's treatment at your store has been reported to the Secretary of Defense." Bob Miller felt the blood drain from his face. "Colonel Chen, I don't understand. What happened?" Chen explained the incident in detail, describing how Tyler had publicly mocked a Medal of Honor recipient for using food assistance. With each word, Miller realized that his store's reputation and possibly his entire business were in jeopardy. Miller, Colonel Mitchell is not just any veteran, he's a national hero whose service record is classified at the highest levels. The fact that he was subjected to this treatment while simply trying to buy groceries is unacceptable to the Department of Defense. "What can I do to fix this?" Miller asked desperately. "For starters, the employee responsible for this incident should be terminated immediately. But more importantly, this situation has highlighted broader issues with how veterans are treated in civilian establishments." Within 2 hours, Tyler was fired. Within 4 hours, Bob Miller had personally driven to James's home to deliver a formal apology and an offer to provide free groceries for life. Within 8 hours, the story was on national news, with Miller's market being held up as an example of how not to treat America's hero. The media response was swift and overwhelming. CNN picked up the story first, followed by every major news network. The hashtag #RespectOurHeroes began trending nationally, with millions sharing stories of veteran mistreatment. Tyler's name and photograph were shared widely online, making him unemployable in most retail positions. Within 48 hours, he had received over 10,000 angry messages from Americans who understood James's sacrifice. The Congressional Medal of Honor Society issued a rare public statement condemning the treatment of any veteran seeking assistance, emphasizing that those who had earned America's highest military honor should never face humiliation for needing help. But the federal response went far beyond one grocery store. The incident at Miller's Market became the catalyst for a national initiative to educate businesses about veteran issues and ensure that those who had served their country were treated with appropriate respect. The Department of Veterans Affairs launched a program called Honor Our Veterans that provided training to retail establishments about the challenges facing veterans and the importance of treating all customers with dignity. The program included information about veteran benefits, the reasons why veterans might need assistance, and the legal protections available to those who had served. Miller's Market became the first business to complete the training program, with Bob Miller personally ensuring that every employee understood the sacrifice made by veterans and the respect they deserve. Tyler's replacement was a young veteran who understood firsthand the challenges facing those transitioning from military to civilian life. General Morrison used the incident to launch a broader Pentagon initiative addressing veteran dignity and respect. She worked with James to develop guidelines for how businesses should interact with veterans, particularly those who might be struggling financially or dealing with service-related disabilities. James himself became an unexpected advocate for veteran rights, speaking at conferences and training sessions about the importance of treating all veterans with respect regardless of their current circumstances. His message was simple: veterans had earned the right to assistance through their service, and using that assistance was not something to be ashamed of. His first major speech was delivered at the National Retail Federation's annual conference, where he addressed business leaders about veteran dignity. The speech, titled "Service, Sacrifice, and Respect," became required viewing for retail managers nationwide. "When you see a veteran using benefits," James told the audience, "you're seeing someone who has already paid for those benefits with their service. These benefits aren't charity. They're a debt America owes." The speech received a standing ovation and was later featured in business schools as an example of how one individual could change an entire industry's approach to customer service. The story of Tyler's behavior toward James spread throughout the veteran community, but rather than being remembered as a tale of disrespect, it became a story of how one incident could create positive change for thousands of veterans across the country. 6 months later, James received a letter from the Secretary of Defense thanking him for his continued service to his fellow veterans. But the most meaningful recognition came from the hundreds of veterans who wrote to tell him that the Honor Our Veterans program had prevented them from experiencing similar humiliation. Tyler, meanwhile, learned a lesson that would stay with him for the rest of his life. His brief moment of cruelty toward an elderly veteran had cost him his job, damaged his reputation, and taught him that his assumptions about people could be catastrophically wrong. In the months following his termination, Tyler struggled to find employment as news of his behavior followed him wherever he applied. Employers were reluctant to hire someone who had become a national symbol of veteran disrespect, and Tyler was forced to confront the consequences of his actions in the most personal way possible. Eventually, Tyler found work at a veteran rehabilitation center in Nashville, where he was required to undergo extensive training about veteran issues as a condition of his employment. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the man who had humiliated a Medal of Honor recipient was now working to help veterans adjust to civilian life. The job was transformative for Tyler. Working directly with veterans who were struggling with PTSD, physical disabilities, and financial hardship, he began to understand the magnitude of sacrifice that military service required. He heard stories of young men and women who had given up their health, their peace of mind, and sometimes their lives for their country, only to return home to a society that often misunderstood their needs. Tyler's supervisor at the rehabilitation center was Master Sergeant Maria Santos, a Purple Heart recipient who had lost her left leg to an IED in Afghanistan. Santos had been hired specifically to help Tyler understand what he had done wrong and why veteran respect was so crucial. "Tyler," Santos explained during one of their many conversations, "when you mocked Colonel Mitchell for using food stamps, you weren't just attacking one old man, you were attacking the idea that America keeps its promises to its veterans. You were saying that his 40 years of service didn't matter, that his Medal of Honor was worthless, and that his sacrifices meant nothing." The weight of his actions began to sink in as Tyler met more and more veterans who relied on various forms of assistance. He met former Marines who used food stamps while attending college on the GI Bill. He met Army veterans who needed housing assistance while they searched for employment. He met Air Force veterans who required medical care for service-connected disability. Each veteran Tyler met had a story of service and sacrifice, and each one helped him understand that needing assistance wasn't a sign of failure. It was often a direct result of putting country before personal financial gain. Military pay was modest, and the physical and emotional toll of service often made civilian employment challenging. After 6 months at the rehabilitation center, Tyler wrote a letter to James Mitchell, apologizing for his behavior and explaining how his work with veterans had changed his perspective. The letter was heartfelt and genuine, acknowledging the pain he had caused and the disrespect he had shown to someone who deserved honor rather than humiliation. Miller's Market not only survived the controversy, but became a model for how businesses should treat veterans. Bob Miller established a veteran discount program, hired veterans whenever possible, and made sure that his store was a place where those who had served felt welcome and respected. And James Mitchell? He continued shopping at Miller's Market, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The store had become a place where his service was recognized and honored, where his need for assistance was met with understanding rather than judgment. The message was clear: America's veterans had earned their benefits through sacrifice and service. Those benefits weren't handouts. They were acknowledgments of debt that could never be fully repaid, and anyone who forgot that lesson would find themselves answering to the United States military. This story reminds us that our veterans deserve respect, not judgment, for the assistance they've earned through their service. If you believe our heroes should be honored rather than humiliated, hit like, type respect in the comments, and subscribe to honor their memory, because some people gave everything for our freedom, and the least we can do is treat them with the dignity they've earned.